Well, I've got 49ers roster news for you in New Orleans, and I've got a quote from the great playwright Tennessee Williams. He said that there are 3 American cities, only 3 of them: New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans. Everything else is just Cleveland. Let's make our way across Bourbon Street. That's probably a line that I'm gonna not use when I'm in Cleveland for the Browns game in December, but here in New Orleans with a lot of 49ers fans, a lot of Saints fans too, but red everywhere. I think it's a very, very good line. All right, 49ers roster moves as we get away from the craziness of Bourbon Street. Curtis Robinson has been promoted to the 53. That's a big pay raise for Curtis Robinson, from about $300,000 for the year to over $1 million now as part of that active 53-man roster for San Francisco. Again, 49ers were destined to do that at some point, since you can only elevate a player 3 times from the practice squad. Now, though, it was mandatory because they had to use their 2 elevations on other players. Look, somebody named Darren Lombardi is running for the clerk of the criminal district court here in New Orleans. We're making our way through the French Quarter. The 2 elevations the 49ers had to use from the practice squad were for Adrian Martinez, who's going to be QB2 tomorrow. Behind Mac Jones is going to be starting this game. So he stays on the practice squad, but is temporarily up for the 49ers. And for Braden Willis, since George Kittle is on injured reserve, they needed a tight end 3. So Curtis Robinson, who's a core 4 special teams player for the 49ers, is up. Braden Willis is going to be that tight end 3. That was actually the role that Jake Tonjes held for the 49ers last week. So don't say that it's not important, because Tonjes ended up being the hero. And Adrian Martinez, well, we know that QB2 is extremely important, and that actually is the 49ers' emergency quarterback in this game, since they don't have 3 quarterbacks on the 53, with Mac Jones and Adrian Martinez both go down and are unavailable. That's going to be it for the 49ers. They'll have to go to Kyle Juszczyk at that QB spot. When I was crossing Bourbon Street before I started filming, approached by a few 49ers fans, and the main question consistently seems to be, what do you think of Mac Jones? And my answer consistently is, I think that I like Mac Jones better than Spencer Rattler. That's what it comes down to for the 49ers in this game tomorrow. Other piece of news for San Francisco is that Robert Beal Jr. has been waived. That's the edge rusher out of the University of Georgia. Interesting move, because the 49ers now have 52 men on their 53-man roster. I would assume they're going to try to bring Robert back to the practice squad. There are 2 spots there if he does clear waivers, as I would expect to happen. But with that extra spot on the 53, what do the 49ers do? And one of the interesting things on Friday that's worth noting, since the 49ers do have this open 53-man roster spot, is that the 49ers punter, Thomas Morstead, wasn't taking punt snaps during the 49ers drilling of punt snaps from the long snapper John Weeks. It was Eddie Pinheiro, San Francisco's kicker, who's actually taking those snaps. So it could be that the 49ers were just working on an emergency situation, but they also did work out a couple punters. I know that one of the punters was brought in specifically because he's left-footed, so that the 49ers could prepare for the Saints punter who's left-footed. That was Sky Moore, taking some reps so he could get used to the unusual spin of the football. But that little tidbit that I noticed with Pinheiro at practice is just interesting in conjunction with all of the clues here, given the fact that the 49ers now have an empty roster spot after they waived Robert Beal. Beal was the final 49ers defensive lineman on the 53-man roster. So whenever somebody at that position gets waived, it's not all too big of a surprise. Just a really raw edge rusher out of Georgia when the 49ers drafted him, and played well toward the end of the preseason, which is why I think that Robert Beal Jr. Is somebody the 49ers would want back on their practice squad. What's more interesting about this is, why do the 49ers feel that they need that extra 53-man roster spot? Another interesting thing for San Francisco is that wide receiver position. As you can see, what a quieter area of the French Quarter looks like. We started this off on Bourbon Street, and we continue this now to the spot of the French Quarter where we can actually hear ourselves talk. Now, the opposite angle here is also interesting. By that I mean who didn't get elevated, because Russell Gage, the receiver, was part of the 49ers game plan coming off the practice squad last week in Seattle, but they just didn't have room to elevate him this week. So that tells us that they're comfortable with whom they have on the 53-man roster at wide receiver. Ricky Pearsall, yes, obviously, on his way to a 1,000-yard receiving season. Juwan Jennings looks like he's going to play based on what we saw at practice yesterday back in the Bay Area. And then beyond Jennings, you've got Kendrick Bourne now part of this team. By the way, contract details out on Kendrick Bourne. Cap hit down at $1.69 million for this season. Up to $5 million in earning potential if you include the incentives for Kendrick Bourne. But the 49ers were able to get him in at that price point that I predicted, under $2 or $3 million at 1.67. I think that's a good deal. It is a fully guaranteed deal of up to $1.255 million for Kendrick Bourne. But the original Juwan Jennings is number 3 receiver for the 49ers. Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Sky Moore, as I mentioned, to return some of those punts for the 49ers. But, I mean, if they want Jordan Watkins to play in this game, which is possible, then maybe you sit somebody like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but I think that in all likelihood the 49ers just go 5 bets up and they could leave Russell Gage inactive on that practice squad for this football game. Also, a piece of financial information for the 49ers, Colton McKivitz, that new contract worth the $15 million annually, has saved San Francisco $1.3 million on the salary cap here in 2025. So the 49ers able to push some of that money back. Same financial maneuvering that we see the 49ers do, valuing cap space now more than cap space in the future, letting those deferments work so they could surf the wave of the rising salary cap. And we'll finish up our walk through the less populated areas of the French Quarter. As you guys saw in my initial New Orleans content yesterday, and the game prediction for 49ers Saints was heavy on the food. I'm gonna have to get myself a croque madame. I know the oysters are really good here, but you know, it's the French influence on the cuisine that I think takes this to an absolutely another level in New Orleans. It's going to be a lot of 49ers fans at the Superdome. My Uber driver on the way from the remodeled airport here in New Orleans was talking about how many 49ers fans, how much red he's seen. And of course, you saw the flag out there on Bourbon Street where we started this show. It's going to be a real thing. And I think this is one of the great old venues in the NFL. You've got a lot of new stadiums in the NFL. New Orleans is an older city, one of the oldest in the U.S., and it is a place that also has one of the older stadiums in the NFL, the Louisiana Superdome, the Caesars Superdome now. It's going to be a lot of fun for San Francisco tomorrow.